At the dinner, my parents said, "Sign over this $700,000 property to your brother, or you're dead to us." I smiled and walked out. A week later, they brought a realtor. And instantly regretted it. My name is Maxine. I am 30 years old, a widow, and until recently, the sole owner of a thriving business and property worth roughly $700,000. I'm telling you this right up front because that number, 700,000, is the exact price tag my family put on my worth as a human being, as a daughter, and as a sister. It all started at a family dinner last month. It was supposed to be a regular Sunday roast at my parents' house. I had been dreading it all week. Ever since my husband passed away, going back to my childhood home felt like walking into a sterile, cold museum where none of the exhibits were about me. My mother, Beatrice, had insisted I come. She said it was time for us to heal as a family. She said they were worried about me living alone with so much responsibility. I should have known better. I really should have. We were sitting around the mahogany dining table. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the room for the first 20 minutes. My father, Vernon, was chewing his steak with that usual stern, unreadable expression on his face. Sitting directly across from me was my older brother, Wyatt. Wyatt is 34, but you would think he was a teenager by the way my parents still cut his meat for him, figuratively speaking. He had this unbearable, smug look on his face the entire evening, swirling his wine glass and avoiding my eyes. Then, right as I was taking a sip of water, Beatrice set her fork down. She didn't just set it down, she slammed it against the plate so hard the ceramic chipped. The sound echoed in the quiet room. She looked at me, her eyes cold and calculating, stripping away any pretense of maternal warmth. She told me it was time to stop playing the grieving widow. She actually used those words. Stop playing the grieving widow. She went on a tangent about how I was hoarding a massive property, a free house and business, all to myself. She said it was selfish. She said Wyatt was struggling, that his brilliant tech career needed a financial boost, and that it was only right for me to step up and provide for my brother. I just stared at her, the water turning to ash in my mouth. Before I could even process the absolute audacity of her statement, Vernon chimed in. He didn't yell. He never yells. He just uses that low, intimidating voice he has used to control us my entire life. He told me that family takes care of family. He said the property was too much for a young woman to handle alone anyway, and that signing it over to Wyatt was the logical, responsible thing to do. Then came the ultimatum. Beatrice leaned forward, pointing a finger with a perfectly manicured nail right at my face. She said, "Either you sign this $700,000 property over to your brother by the end of the month, or you are dead to us. You are no longer our daughter. We will completely cut you out of this family." The room went dead silent. Wyatt actually smirked. A full, teeth-baring smirk. He thought he had won. He thought this was the moment I would break, just like I had broken every time I was bullied in my childhood. He expected me to cry, to beg for their love, to hand over my life's work just to keep the peace. I didn't cry. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but a strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The numbness protected me. I looked at Beatrice, then at Vernon, and finally at Wyatt's arrogant face. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my plate. I just let a cold, slow smile spread across my face. I stood up, pushed my chair back, picked up my purse, and walked out the front door without saying a single word. The silence I left behind was deafening. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. To understand why I walked out, and why I would rather burn that building to the ground than give it to Wyatt, you have to understand what that property actually is. It is not just a building. It is not a free house. It is the physical manifestation of the love of my life, Silas. I met Silas 7 years ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, working as a freelance graphic designer and serving coffee part-time just to pay my rent. He walked into the cafe soaking wet from a sudden Alabama downpour, laughing at his own misfortune. Silas had this infectious energy. He was a visionary, but unlike my brother Wyatt, who only dreamed of getting rich quick, Silas was a worker. He had calluses on his hands and dirt under his fingernails. We fell in love over cheap diner food and late-night conversations about our futures. Silas had a dream of opening a large-scale organic market and community art space. He wanted a place where local farmers could sell their produce and local artists could display their work. I fell in love with his dream just as hard as I fell in love with him. When we got married, we didn't buy a fancy house or go on a luxury honeymoon. We poured every single penny we had into an abandoned warehouse in the Five Points district. Getting the financing was a nightmare. We practically begged the banks, finally securing a $300,000 business loan. We were drowning in debt, but we were doing it together. I remember the smell of sawdust and fresh paint that lingered in my hair for 2 solid years. Silas built the wooden display shelves by hand. He sanded the floors until his knees bled. I designed the branding, the logos, the marketing materials, and painted the grand mural on the brick wall outside. We slept on a mattress in the back office more nights than I can count, eating instant noodles and holding each other when the stress became too much. When Julian's Haven finally opened, it was a massive success. The community loved it. Over the next 4 years, we expanded. I built a beautiful, light-filled design studio on the 2nd floor where I ran my graphic design business, while Silas managed the bustling organic market downstairs. By the time of the family dinner, the property and the thriving business attached to it had been appraised at $700,000. Every single nail in that building, every coat of paint, every dollar of profit was earned through our blood, our sweat, and our tears. It was our child. It was the legacy Silas and I built from absolute scratch. So when my mother called it a free house, she was not just insulting me. She was spitting on the grave of the hardest working man I have ever known. Silas died 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday. It was raining, just like the day we met. He was driving his pickup truck back from a local farm with a load of fresh honey when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit him broadside. I remember the phone call from the police at 2 in the morning. I remember the blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway. I remember the exact texture of the cheap plastic chair I was sitting in when the doctor came out with that look of pity on his face. The grief did not just break my heart, it shattered my entire reality. The world lost its color. For the first few months, I functioned purely on autopilot. The only thing that kept me breathing was walking into the market every morning, smelling the fresh produce, and feeling Silas's presence in the walls we built together. You would think losing a husband at 29 would earn a daughter some compassion from her parents. But my parents are not normal people. At Silas's funeral, while I was standing by the casket barely able to hold my own weight, Beatrice leaned in to hug me. Do you know what she whispered in my ear? Not that she loved me. Not that it would be okay. She whispered, "Let's hope the life insurance is enough to cover the store's debts. Maybe Wyatt can step in and manage the accounts for you." I felt sick to my stomach, but I was not surprised. This is who they have always been. Growing up, I was the invisible daughter, the scapegoat, while Wyatt was the golden child who could do no wrong. When I was 16, I won a statewide art competition. It was the proudest moment of my young life. The award ceremony fell on the same day as Wyatt's regional baseball tryouts. My parents didn't even hesitate. They went to the tryouts. Wyatt didn't even make the team, but they took him out for a steak dinner to celebrate his effort. I took the bus home alone, holding my first-place trophy on my lap. When it came time for college, my parents told me there was no money saved for me. They said I needed to pull myself up by my bootstraps and take out student loans. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my degree. 2 years later, Wyatt dropped out of a business program because it was too hard. Instead of being angry, my parents dipped into their retirement fund to buy him a brand new sports car to cheer him up. They trained me to accept less. They conditioned me to believe my role in the family was to be the quiet, self-sufficient background character whose only purpose was to support the shining star that was Wyatt. But Silas changed all that. He taught me my worth. When he died, my parents assumed the strong, independent woman I had become would die with him. They thought the broken, compliant little girl would return, ready to hand over her life savings to her brother. They were dead wrong. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I didn't go to the market. I drove straight to the office of Valerie, the lawyer who had helped Silas and me draft our wills a few years back. Valerie is a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who has seen every ugly side of human nature there is to see. I sat in her leather chair, my hands shaking as I held my coffee cup, and recounted exactly what my parents had demanded. I asked her, point blank, if there was any legal loophole they could use. Could they sue me? Could they claim I was mentally unfit due to grief and seize the property? Valerie adjusted her glasses, opened my file, and gave me a look of pure, professional reassurance. She told me that the probate process was fully complete. Because Silas and I own the property as joint tenants with the right of survivorship, and because his will explicitly left all his worldly possessions to me, the property was 100% mine. There were no liens, no secret debts, and absolutely no legal avenue for my parents or my brother to stake a claim. You are bulletproof, Maxine, Valerie said, closing the folder. It is your asset. You can sell it, burn it, or turn it into a roller skating rink. They have nothing on you legally. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since the dinner. But then Valerie leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, her expression turning serious. She told me she handles estate law for a living, and that means she watches families tear each other to shreds over a few $1,000s, let alone $700,000. She warned me that toxic families do not care about the law when they feel entitled to your money. If they can't beat you in court, they will try to beat you in the court of public opinion. They will use emotional blackmail, harassment, and psychological warfare to grind you down until you sign the papers just to make the pain stop. She told me to lock my doors, document every interaction, and prepare for a hurricane. I drove home that day feeling a strange mix of absolute security and impending doom. I knew my parents. I knew Wyatt. They were lazy, but they were incredibly persistent when it came to getting what they wanted without working for it. Valerie was right. They were vultures circling a fresh kill, and I was the only thing standing between them and a massive payday. It only took 3 days for the hurricane to hit. It was a Wednesday evening. I was at my apartment, wearing Silas's old college sweatshirt, trying to force down a bowl of soup. The buzzer to my building rang. I ignored it. Then it rang again, a long, aggressive, unbroken sound. Before I could even check the intercom, there was a heavy pounding on my actual apartment door. Someone had piggybacked off a neighbor entering the building. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was Vernon, Beatrice, and Wyatt. They were standing in my hallway, looking impatient. I made the mistake of unlocking the door to tell them to leave. The second the lock clicked, Vernon pushed the door open, forcing me to step back, and the three of them marched into my sanctuary like they owned the place. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't ask if I had eaten. Beatrice walked straight to my kitchen island, placed her designer handbag on the counter, and crossed her arms. Wyatt threw himself onto my living room sofa, putting his expensive sneakers on my coffee table. Beatrice started immediately. She said they were here to get the paperwork sorted out. She spoke in that condescending, sing-song voice she uses when she is trying to manage a difficult child. She said she had spoken to a realtor and a lawyer, and they had drawn up a very simple quitclaim deed. All I had to do was sign it, and the property would transfer to Wyatt. I asked them if they had lost their absolute minds. I told them to get out of my house. Wyatt rolled his eyes, sitting up and pulling a glossy folder from his jacket. He started pitching me his ridiculous idea. He said he was working on a revolutionary tech startup, an app that would disrupt the delivery industry. He threw around buzzwords like blockchain and synergy, sounding like a cheap podcast bro. He said he needed the $700,000 property to use as collateral for a massive venture capital loan. He actually looked me in the eye and said, "Come on, Maxine, you are just selling vegetables. I am going to change the world. Give me the building, and I will give you a 5% equity stake in my company when it goes public." The sheer audacity of it made me dizzy. I looked at this 34-year-old man, who still brought his laundry to our mother on weekends, trying to steal my dead husband's legacy for a pipe dream. I didn't argue. I didn't debate the merits of his stupid app. I grabbed the folder out of his hands, threw it into the hallway, and pointed at the door. I told them if they did not leave my apartment in exactly 10 seconds, I was calling the police and having them trespassed. Vernon's face turned purple. He stepped toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, but I didn't flinch. I stared right back into his eyes. Beatrice grabbed Vernon's arm, realizing I was not bluffing. As she walked out the door, she turned to me, her face twisted in absolute disgust. She said, "You will regret this, Maxine. You are going to end up completely alone, and it will be your own fault. You are dead to us." I slammed the door so hard the framed pictures on the wall rattled. I slid down to the floor, my knees weak, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush, making me physically sick. But I had held my ground. That night, I didn't sleep a single wink. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the anxiety to subside. It never did. The emotional blackmail started bright and early the next morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 6 a.m. It was a text message from Beatrice. It was a massive block of text, beautifully crafted to inflict maximum psychological damage. She wrote about how she had stayed awake all night crying over what a cold, heartless monster I had become. She brought up every sacrifice she supposedly made for me as a child, claiming she went without new clothes so I could eat. A complete lie. She bought a new cashmere sweater every fall. She wrote that family is the only thing that matters in this world, and that Silas would be ashamed of how greedy I was being. That line almost broke me. Using Silas's name to justify their theft. It was a low blow, even for her. An hour later, another text arrived. This time from Vernon. It said, "Your mother is experiencing severe chest pains because of the stress you are causing her. If she has a heart attack, the blood is on your hands. Be a good daughter and fix this." I sat at my kitchen table, dissecting their manipulation tactics. I realized they were following a playbook they had used my whole life. The gaslighting. The sudden, mysterious medical emergencies whenever they didn't get their way. The projection of their own greed onto me. In the past, this tactic would have sent me running to their house, apologizing profusely, offering whatever meager savings I had to make my mother's fake chest pains go away. But not today. I imagined Silas sitting across the table from me, drinking his black coffee, giving me that warm, reassuring smile. I remembered the nights we spent painting the walls of the market, our hands covered in primer, talking about building a life that was ours, a life free from the toxicity of my childhood. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about money. It was about my soul. If I gave them the property, I would be erasing Silas. I would be erasing the woman I had become. I would be confirming that I was nothing more than an asset to be liquidated for Wyatt's benefit. I turned the volume off on my phone. I didn't block them yet. I needed to keep a record of their harassment, just like Valerie advised. I took a deep breath, got dressed, and drove to the market. Walking through the front doors, smelling the fresh earth from the produce bins, hearing the chatter of the morning customers, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was my sanctuary. This was my legacy. And I was going to protect it, no matter how dirty my family decided to play. Thank you for following the story this far. Please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on exciting family dramas every day. And don't forget to leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you very much. The silence from my parents after I kicked them out of my apartment was completely unnatural. I knew Vernon and Beatrice well enough to understand that their silence was never a retreat. It was always a reloading phase. They were just changing their ammunition. Since intimidation in the privacy of my home had failed, Beatrice decided to take the war public. She weaponized our entire community against me. It started with social media. My phone, which I had placed on the kitchen counter, began vibrating constantly. I made the mistake of looking at the notifications. Beatrice had posted a long, tear-jerking essay on her profile. She didn't name me directly at first, but she painted a tragic picture of a grieving mother whose family was being torn apart by the greed of one child. She talked about how Wyatt was on the verge of a life-changing opportunity, a startup that could help the world, but his own blood relative was hoarding resources and refusing to help him. She ended the post by asking her friends for prayers because her heart was physically failing from the betrayal. The comments were a bloodbath. Aunts and uncles I had not spoken to in a decade were suddenly chiming in, calling me heartless, selfish, and a disgrace to Silas's memory. My phone was flooded with text messages from distant cousins telling me to do the right thing and stop killing my mother with my stubbornness. They all bought into the narrative. Why wouldn't they? Beatrice was a master at playing the weeping martyr. But the digital harassment was nothing compared to the real-world isolation. A few days later, I went to a local supermarket to buy some groceries for the week. I was exhausted, wearing sweatpants and a messy bun, just trying to grab some milk and get out. That is when I ran into Sylvia. Sylvia was an older woman who lived 3 houses down from my parents. She had known me since I was in diapers. I used to mow her lawn for extra pocket money when I was a teenager. As I turned down the dairy aisle, she locked eyes with me. I offered a tired, polite smile. She did not smile back. She stopped her shopping cart right in the middle of the aisle, blocking my path, and looked me up and down with absolute disgust. She told me she had heard what I was doing to my poor parents. She raised her voice, not caring who was listening in the store. She said, "Your mother is sick with worry over your brother, and you are sitting on a gold mine refusing to share." Silas was such a generous young man. He would be absolutely sickened to see the greedy woman you have turned into. I stood there frozen. The blood drained from my face. Other shoppers were turning their heads, whispering. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her about the $300,000 loan, about the blisters on Silas's hands, about how Wyatt had never worked a hard day in his 34 years of life. But my throat closed up. The psychological weight of being universally hated by the people you grew up around is crushing. It makes you question your own sanity. I left my shopping cart right there in the aisle, walked out of the sliding glass doors, and cried in my car for an hour. I felt completely, utterly alone. That night, I hit absolute rock bottom. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the lights off, surrounded by the silence. I had the official property deed sitting on my lap. The document that proved I was the sole owner of the $700,000 legacy Silas and I had built. The smear campaign was working. I was exhausted. The grief of losing my husband, compounded by the sheer cruelty of my own family, was suffocating me. A dark, insidious thought crept into my mind. What if I just signed it over? If I gave Wyatt the property, the harassment would stop. My mother's fake heart condition would miraculously cure itself. The town would stop looking at me like I was a monster. I could just pack my bags, move to a different state, and disappear. It seemed so easy to just surrender. I had a pen in my hand, staring at the signature line, when there was a loud, frantic knocking at my door. It was not the aggressive pounding of my father. It was the rhythmic, urgent knock of my best friend, Naomi. Naomi is a force of nature. We had been friends since college. She was the one who held my hand at the funeral when my parents were busy worrying about my finances. I unlocked the door, and she barged in, taking one look at my tear-stained face, the dark apartment, and the property deed in my lap. She snatched the deed right out of my hands and threw it onto the kitchen counter. Then she grabbed me by the shoulders and looked me dead in the eyes. She told me to snap out of it. She had seen Beatrice's posts. She had heard the rumors circulating around town. And she was furious. Not at me, but for me. She said, "Maxine, do not let them rewrite your reality. You built that store. You and Silas. Wyatt does not even know how to plunge his own toilet, let alone run a commercial property. Your mother is manipulating you because she knows you have a good heart and she is using your grief against you." I broke down sobbing, telling her how tired I was, how much it hurt that everyone believed I was the villain. Naomi pulled me into a hug and let me cry until I had nothing left. Then she made me a cup of strong black tea, sat me down, and delivered the hard truth. She reminded me that Silas left the property to me because he trusted me to protect it. Giving it to Wyatt would not bring me peace. It would only bring me a lifetime of regret and resentment. Naomi asked me a simple question. She said, "If Silas were sitting here right now, what would he tell you to do to the people trying to steal his life's work?" The image of Silas flashed in my mind. Silas, who fought tooth and nail for every permit, every piece of wood, every customer. He would never back down from a bully. That realization was like a bucket of ice water over my head. The sadness and the exhaustion suddenly evaporated, replaced by a deep, burning anger. Naomi was right. I was not going to be the victim anymore. If they wanted to play dirty, if they wanted to treat my business like a pawn on a chessboard, then I was going to flip the entire board upside down. The spark of anger Naomi ignited quickly turned into a cold, calculated strategy. I realized that keeping the property was tearing my mental health apart because it tied me to my family. But giving it to Wyatt was out of the question. I needed a third option. I needed to separate the emotional legacy of the building from the physical bricks and mortar. I needed a way to protect my design studio, cash out my equity, and deliver a fatal blow to Wyatt's massive ego. I opened my laptop and started researching Wyatt's current employer. Wyatt worked for a mid-sized tech firm in the city. He always bragged about being a high-level project manager, but a quick search on LinkedIn revealed he was barely a junior associate. The man who owned the firm was named Preston. Preston was known in the local business community as a shark. He was a ruthless, brilliant investor who had a reputation for buying up distressed commercial properties and turning them into cash cows. He was practical, completely devoid of sentimentality, and incredibly wealthy. He was exactly the kind of man my brother feared. At midnight, I sent Preston a direct, highly confidential email. I introduced myself, explained my ownership of a prime piece of real estate in the Five Points district appraised at $700,000, and asked for a discreet meeting regarding a highly lucrative, off-market sale. He replied within 20 minutes. We agreed to meet at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town the very next night. When I walked into the diner, Preston was already sitting in a back booth, nursing a black coffee. He wore a tailored suit, looking entirely out of place under the flickering neon lights. I sat down, skipped the small talk, and laid the appraisal documents, the profit and loss statements, and the deed on the table. Preston reviewed the paperwork with clinical precision. He knew Julian's Haven. He knew the foot traffic it generated. He leaned back and asked me why I was selling such a profitable asset so quietly. I looked him in the eye and told him the truth. I told him my family was trying to extort me and that his junior associate, Wyatt, was planning to use this property to fund a fictitious tech startup. Preston let out a low, dry chuckle. He was well aware of Wyatt's incompetence at the firm. I told Preston I would sell him the entire property and the business attached to it for a 10% discount under market value, ensuring a fast, clean cash transaction. But I had two non-negotiable clauses. First, I required an ironclad, lifetime lease for the second floor of the building at a locked, below-market rate. My design studio would remain untouched, and I would operate completely independently from the market downstairs. Second, as the new owner of the business, Preston had to transfer Wyatt's employment contract from the comfortable corporate tech office to the floor of the organic market. Wyatt would no longer be a tech associate. He would be the minimum wage stockboy, reporting directly to the store manager. If Wyatt refused, Preston would terminate his employment at the tech firm entirely. Preston stared at me for a long moment. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He loved the profitability of the real estate, and he seemed thoroughly amused by the ruthless poetry of the revenge. We shook hands right there in the diner. Over the next 3 days, my lawyer Valerie and Preston's legal team worked quietly and efficiently. The papers were signed, the money was wired to my account, and the trap was perfectly set. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, cool breeze. It was the deadline my mother had aggressively set in one of her rambling, guilt-tripping voicemails earlier that week. She had promised, with terrifying cheerfulness, that they were coming to the market at 10 o'clock sharp to finally put this ugly family dispute to rest. She had even bragged to my Aunt Clara, who immediately gossiped it back to me, that she had hired a premium real estate agent to facilitate the property transfer on the spot. I woke up at dawn. For the first time in 6 months, I did not wake up with a heavy weight on my chest. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I put on my favorite pair of jeans, a comfortable sweater, and drove to the market. I unlocked the front doors and stepped inside. The morning sunlight was streaming through the large glass windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The store smelled of roasted coffee beans, fresh basil, and damp earth. It was a smell that usually brought tears to my eyes, a sensory reminder of Silas's hands covered in soil. But today, the smell brought me peace. I walked down the aisles, trailing my fingers over the wooden shelves Silas had built. I wasn't saying goodbye to the store. The spirit of what we built was safe. I was just changing the locks on my life. My staff arrived at 8 o'clock, completely unaware of the hurricane heading toward our doors. I told my floor manager to take his time unloading the delivery truck in the back alley and to let me handle the front register for the first few hours. I wanted to be standing right there, front and center, when my family walked in. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, stood behind the solid oak counter, and waited. I listened to the soft hum of the refrigeration units. I watched the clock tick closer to 10. I felt a strange, zen-like calm wash over me. I had spent my entire life being afraid of my father's anger, being manipulated by my mother's tears, and being overshadowed by my brother's arrogance. I had spent the last month feeling like a hunted animal. But the hunt was over. The prey had led the wolves directly into a steel cage. At exactly 10 minutes past 10, a sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb outside the shop. My mother had clearly rented it to look wealthy for the realtor. The doors opened, and the vultures stepped out onto the sidewalk. The little brass bell above the front door chimed cheerfully, a jarring contrast to the dark energy that flooded into the room. Vernon walked in first, his chest puffed out, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Beatrice followed close behind, wearing a ridiculously oversized pair of sunglasses and a designer coat, looking around the store with a visible expression of disdain. Wyatt swaggered in next, his hands in his pockets, acting as if he had already mentally remodeled the entire place. Bringing up the rear was a woman in a sharp gray pantsuit, clutching a clipboard. The realtor. She had that fake, aggressive smile of someone who was about to make a massive commission off someone else's misery. There were a few early morning customers browsing the produce aisles. Beatrice did not care. She walked right up to the front counter where I was standing, pulled off her sunglasses, and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. She said, "Well, Maxine, I hope you have finally come to your senses. We are all exhausted from your little temper tantrum." Wyatt didn't even look at me. He was pointing at the wall of organic preserves, telling the realtor that the entire shelving unit needed to be demolished to make room for his new server racks. He said the rustic aesthetic was garbage and he needed a sleek, modern, Silicon Valley vibe. He was talking about my husband's hand-built shelves as if they were trash. Vernon stepped up to the counter, unlatched his briefcase, and pulled out a stack of legal documents. He slapped them down onto the wood with a loud smack. He placed a heavy silver pen on top of the papers. He looked at me with those cold, dead eyes and said, "This is the quitclaim deed. Sign it right now. We have wasted enough time. Wyatt has meetings with investors next week, and he needs this collateral secured today. If you sign this, we can go back to being a family. If you do not, you can consider yourself an orphan." The realtor stepped forward, tapping her manicured finger on the signature line. She used a sickeningly sweet voice, telling me it was a standard transfer of assets and that keeping wealth within the family was always the smartest financial move. She was completely oblivious to the fact that she was participating in a psychological mugging. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at Wyatt, who was now leaning against the counter, flashing me that same arrogant, punchable smirk he had worn at the family dinner a month ago. He thought he had broken me. He thought the weight of the town's hatred and my parents' pressure had finally cracked my spine. I didn't pick up the pen. I just crossed my arms over my chest, leaned back against the back counter, and let a wide, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked directly at Wyatt and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't sign those papers." Beatrice's face instantly contorted into rage. She opened her mouth to start screaming, to unleash the fury she had been holding back, But before she could utter a single syllable, the brass bell above the door chimed again. The heavy wooden door swung shut. The footsteps walking across the hardwood floor were slow, deliberate, and commanded absolute authority. Everyone turned around. Standing there in a pristine, charcoal gray, custom-tailored suit was Preston. He looked around the store, his eyes taking in the rustic decor, the fresh produce, and finally landing on the bizarre family gathering at the front counter. Wyatt's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He stood up straight, stammering, trying to find his words. He managed to choke out, "Mr. Preston? What are you doing here?" "Sir, I took the morning off for a family emergency. I submitted the request to HR." Preston ignored him. He walked straight up to the counter, stood next to me, and looked down at the legal documents Vernon had slapped onto the wood. Preston picked up the silver pen, examined it for a second, and then tossed it casually into a nearby trash can. He turned to my father, who looked utterly confused, and spoke in a voice smooth as glass, but sharp as a razor. He said, "I am afraid these documents are completely useless. You cannot transfer the deed to a property that this young woman no longer owns." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Beatrice's mouth dropped open. Vernon's brow furrowed in deep, angry confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" Vernon demanded, his voice rising. "Who are you?" Preston offered a polite, completely insincere smile. He introduced himself. He said, "I am Preston. I am the CEO of the firm your son allegedly works for. And as of 72 hours ago, I am the sole, legal owner of this building and the business that operates within it. Maxine sold it to me. The cash has cleared. The deed is in my name. You are currently standing in my store." Beatrice let out a high-pitched gasp, clutching her pearls. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pure hatred. "You sold it?" she shrieked. "You sold your brother's future to a stranger?" I looked right back at her, my voice remarkably steady. I said it was never Wyatt's future. It was my past. And I decided to cash it in. But the real masterpiece of the morning was yet to come. Preston turned his attention to Wyatt, who looked like he was about to pass out. Preston clasped his hands behind his back and addressed his employee. Preston said, "Wyatt, I have reviewed your performance at the firm. You are, quite frankly, a terrible project manager. You miss deadlines, you offload your work onto the interns, and you have zero leadership skills. I was planning to terminate your contract entirely. However, as part of my purchase agreement with Maxine, we negotiated a special clause just for you." Wyatt swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "What clause?" he whispered. Preston pointed down at the floor. He said, "Your employment contract has been transferred to Julian's Haven. Effective this Monday at 6 in the morning, your new title is Inventory Specialist. You will be unloading trucks, sweeping these floors, and stocking the organic produce. Your salary has been adjusted to minimum wage. If you refuse the transfer, or if you quit, your employment is terminated with cause, meaning you will receive absolutely no severance and no recommendation." The devastation was absolute. Wyatt's knees actually buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from falling. The golden child, the tech genius, the heir apparent, had just been publicly demoted to a stock boy in front of his parents and the realtor. Vernon exploded. He lunged forward, his face purple with rage, screaming that this was illegal, that they would sue us into bankruptcy. Preston just pulled a sleek cell phone from his pocket, his face completely bored. He told Vernon that if he raised his voice again, he would have him arrested for trespassing on private commercial property. The realtor, realizing she was standing in the middle of a war zone with zero chance of making a commission, quietly backed out of the store and practically ran to her car. I looked at my family. The bullies who had tormented me my whole life. The people who tried to steal my husband's legacy. They were broken. Their arrogance was shattered into a million pieces on the floor of my store. I told them to get out. They turned and walked out the door in total, humiliating defeat. The humiliation my family suffered at the market that Friday morning was not the end of their fight, but it was the beginning of their complete financial and social ruin. True to his nature, Vernon refused to accept defeat. He believed that sheer aggression could bend reality to his will. A week after the confrontation, I was served with legal papers. My parents had drained a significant portion of their retirement savings to hire an aggressive, sleazy litigation lawyer. They filed a massive civil suit against both me and Preston, claiming fraud, claiming I was not of sound mind due to grief when I signed the sale papers, and claiming that Preston had used predatory tactics to steal a family asset. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to claw back control. I immediately called Valerie. She didn't even sound concerned on the phone. She actually sounded bored. She told me not to lose a single minute of sleep over it. When the preliminary hearing took place, it was a bloodbath. Valerie and Preston's corporate legal team walked into the courtroom carrying boxes of ironclad evidence. They presented the medical evaluations I had voluntarily taken to prove my mental competency prior to the sale. They presented the financial appraisals showing Preston paid a completely fair and legal price. They even presented the harassing text messages and voicemails my parents had sent me, proving that the only coercion happening was from my family trying to steal the property from me. The judge took less than 20 minutes to review the evidence. He looked at my parents' lawyer with absolute disdain, dismissed the case entirely with prejudice, and ordered my parents to pay all of our legal fees for wasting the court's time. I watched Vernon's face turn a sickening shade of pale as he realized how much money he had just lost in a matter of minutes. Beatrice buried her face in her hands. But the legal defeat was nothing compared to the social fallout. Court records are public. The truth about the lawsuit, the texts, and the reality of who owned the property leaked into our community. The town, which had so eagerly sharpened their pitchforks against me based on Beatrice's Facebook posts, suddenly realized they had been played. The narrative flipped overnight. People realized I was not a greedy widow hoarding wealth. I was a grieving woman defending her life's work from a family of leeches. A few days after the court case was dismissed, I was walking up the stairs to my studio when I saw Sylvia, the neighbor who had publicly shamed me in the grocery store, standing near the entrance of the market. She looked incredibly uncomfortable, holding a small basket of organic apples. When she saw me, she practically ran over. She looked at the floor, her face red, and offered a stammering, deeply embarrassed apology. She admitted she should never have listened to my mother's lies. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her it was perfectly okay, because it was not okay. But I nodded, accepted her apology, and walked upstairs. It felt incredibly vindicating to watch the community's judgment shift from me back to where it truly belonged. As for Wyatt, the reality of his new life hit him like a freight train. Because his massive ego refused to let him quit and admit total defeat, he actually showed up for his first shift as the inventory specialist. It was a disaster from day one. Wyatt, who believed physical labor was beneath him, complained constantly. He refused to wear the store apron. He mishandled the organic produce, bruising hundreds of dollars worth of fruit. He was rude to the customers and openly insubordinate to the floor manager. I watched him from the glass window of my second-floor studio. I would sit there sipping my tea, watching my 34-year-old brother struggle to stack boxes of almond milk while I worked on high-paying design contracts. The poetic justice of it was almost intoxicating. His employment did not last long. After 2 months of constant warnings, Wyatt left a refrigeration unit completely unplugged overnight, spoiling over $2,000 worth of dairy and meat. Preston did not hesitate. He fired Wyatt on the spot for cause. Wyatt was escorted off the property by security, holding a small cardboard box of his belongings. With the lawsuit fees destroying their savings, and their golden child officially unemployed with a terrible stain on his resume, the illusion of my parents' perfect life collapsed. The shame in the community was too much for Beatrice to bear. 3 months later, I saw a for sale sign go up on the lawn of my childhood home. They sold the house at a loss to get out of town quickly. I heard through a distant cousin that they moved to a small, rural town in Georgia, dragging Wyatt along with them, where they could pretend to be victims all over again. I didn't reach out. I felt absolutely nothing when they left. It has been 6 months since that Friday morning checkmate. My life looks very different now. Preston has been an incredible landlord. He kept the core values of Julian's Haven intact, but brought in a dedicated management team that increased efficiency. The market is thriving, bringing fresh food to the community just like Silas always wanted. As for me, the money from the sale sits securely in an investment account, securing my financial future for the rest of my life. I spend my days in my sunlit studio on the second floor. Naomi and I officially partnered up, expanding my graphic design business into a full-service creative agency. We have more clients than we can handle. Sometimes, late at night, when the market downstairs is closed and the building is quiet, I sit by the window and look out over the street. I think about Silas. I think about the man who taught me how to stand up for myself, who loved me enough to leave me the tools to build my own fortress. I did not betray his memory by selling the bricks and mortar. I honored his memory by refusing to let toxic people destroy me. I protected the soul of our legacy, and I bought my freedom. Looking back, my aunt still occasionally sends me emails saying I destroyed our family over just a building and that a real sister would have found a compromise. So, tell me, am I the jerk for selling my late husband's legacy to my brother's boss just to watch his ego burn, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming daily Reddit dramas. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. See you in the next video.